Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we are stepping into a sweeping, incredibly dramatic historical narrative from ancient Judah. But what I found so compelling about the specific source material is that the core theme is something we literally still deal with today. We're talking about facing completely overwhelming odds. So let's explore exactly how one ancient king responded when his situation looked entirely hopeless. So let me ask you this. When an absolute, insurmountable crisis hits out of nowhere, what is the very first thing you do? Do you panic? Do you immediately try to problem solve and fix it yourself? Keep your own modern psychological reality in mind here, because we're about to watch an ancient leader navigate a crisis that would paralyze most of us today. All right, let's dive into Section 1, the start of a massive crisis. Up until this exact point in the history books, King Jehoshaphat had a really solid track record. He was known as a faithful king, but his era of peace is just abruptly shattered when some terrifying news arrives right at his doorstep. A massive invasion is imminent. And it was an absolute nightmare of a matchup. Just look at this. On one side, you have the single, completely isolated nation of Judah. On the other side, a massive, brutal allied coalition of Moab, Ammon, and Edom. Now, any one of these nations on their own would be a really formidable foe, but all three uniting against him? The historical sources make it very clear that this wasn't just some minor border skirmish. This was a threat of total, utter annihilation. Now, while digging into the original texts, I actually found a fascinating little nugget of ancient biblical scholarship. Some of the ancient manuscripts say that these invaders came from Aram across the sea. But if you look at the Hebrew, the letters for Aram and Edom are virtually identical, save for just one tiny little stroke. It was a classic ancient scribal typo. Geographically, Aram makes no sense at all here. The invaders were definitely from Edom, a localized coalition marching straight for Judah. Which brings us to Section 2, the king's strange response. Faced with this terrifying triple threat coalition, the text is brutally honest with us. King Jehoshaphat was afraid. But his immediate reaction really builds this incredible narrative tension, because instead of calling a war council, drafting a strategy, or sending out diplomats for aid, the terrified king does something completely unexpected. He literally calls for a nationwide fast and a prayer gathering. I mean, think about that. In the face of a literal, heavily armed advancing army, he doesn't mobilize his troops, he mobilizes his people to seek spiritual intervention. He takes all of that paralyzing fear and channels it entirely in a completely different direction. And this brings us to what might just be one of the most raw, vulnerable leadership moments in all of ancient history. Standing before the people, the king prays, "We have no power. Our eyes are on you." You know, human instinct tells us to obsess over the crisis, to hyper-focus on the threat. But the text emphasizes that Jehoshaphat intentionally shifted his entire nation's focus away from their own lack of power and placed it squarely on God's capability. All right, moving to Section 3, the master of the war changes. This extreme vulnerability actually triggers the narrative's massive turning point. Picture the scene. It's totally silent. The entire nation is fasting. And then the text says the Spirit of God falls. But it doesn't fall on the king, and it doesn't fall on the high priest. It falls on this totally ordinary man in the crowd named Jahaziel.
So you're probably wondering, who exactly is Jahaziel? Well, the ancient source takes the time to specifically trace his lineage back 4 generations to a man named Asaph. And if you dig into the history, Asaph was King David's legendary choir director. Jahaziel comes from this deep, renowned lineage of singers. It is just a brilliant piece of foreshadowing in the text. The solution to this massive military crisis is going to come from a family of musicians.
So Jahaziel stands up in the middle of this terrified crowd and just delivers the core thesis of this entire explainer. This battle is not yours, but God's. The absolutely crucial point the text is making here is that the master of the war has just changed. God steps in and essentially tells Judah that he is taking full 100% responsibility for the outcome of this conflict. But actually, scratch that. They aren't just told to go home, lock their doors, and take a nap. They're given a very specific set of commands. 1, take your position. 2, stand firm. And 3, see the deliverance. The beautiful irony here is that the word fighting is completely missing from the list. The text is describing faith not as doing absolutely nothing, but as having the courage to march right up to the terrifying front lines just to stand firm and watch. And this brilliantly illustrates a profound historical parallel in the sources.
Hundreds of years prior to this moment, Moses was trapped at the Red Sea. Now, Jahaziel is speaking to a trapped Judah. Yet the command in both of these ancient texts is exactly the same. Stand firm and see the deliverance. For the ancient Judeans, hearing those specific, familiar words would have been the ultimate proof that the miraculous deliverance of the Red Sea was about to happen right in their own backyard.
Which brings us to Section 4, Praise Instead of Weapons. This is the absolute climax of the story. The very next morning, King Jehoshaphat leads his people out to the battlefield, and he makes a military deployment that is, frankly, completely absurd by any human standard. The king places a choir at the absolute front lines. No swords, no shields, no spears, just singers, loudly chanting, "Give thanks to the Lord, for his steadfast love endures forever." Just imagine being the enemy coalition for a second. You're armed to the teeth, you look over the ridge, ready for a slaughter, and you just see an unarmed choir marching towards you, singing. But literally, as soon as that song of praise begins, the greatest plot twist in military history unfolds. According to the text, the events go down in 3 phases. Phase 1, the coalition inexplicably fractures, and Moab and Ammon violently turn on their own ally, Edom. Phase 2, once Edom is wiped out, Moab and Ammon turn on each other. And Phase 3, by the time Judah's choir actually reaches the overlook, there is total silence. The enemy coalition had completely self-destructed. And get this, the devastation was so absolute, and the coalition had brought so much wealth with them for the campaign, that the text says it took the people of Judah 3 full days just to gather all the plunder. 3 whole days. The very army that was meant to wipe them off the map ended up enriching them beyond belief. Moving on to Section 5, From the Valley of Despair to Blessing. Fast forward to the 4th day, and the narrative transitions to the immediate aftermath. The very location that was destined to be the graveyard of the Judean nation transforms into a monument of immense, overwhelming gratitude. The people gather in the valley, and they officially rename it the Valley of Barakah. Now, Barakah is actually a Hebrew word that translates to blessing or praise. It's just a perfect way to capture the thematic transformation of the entire story. When God took over the battle, their literal valley of despair and certain death became their greatest historical memorial of thanksgiving. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, our spiritual battle today. Let's look at how the source material builds this right into our reality today. Because this isn't just presented as some fascinating ancient thriller to entertain us. The texts emphasize that the mechanics of this story are meant to apply directly to our everyday lives. Obviously, we don't have ancient sword-wielding armies marching on our homes. But the application here is that we absolutely face our own modern coalitions, right? Things like health crises, financial collapse, broken relationships, or just paralyzing anxiety. When all of these forces gang up on us at the exact same time, the text argues that we are in the exact same psychological position as King Jehoshaphat, staring at disaster and feeling completely, totally powerless. And that is precisely why this source material hammers home its most powerful motif again and again. The battle is not yours, but God's. The ultimate takeaway from this historical account is that when we try to fight massive, insurmountable battles using only our own limited strength, we fail. But when we admit our lack of power and we step into the fray armed with praise instead of panic, the responsibility for the victory actually shifts. So, I want to leave you with this final thought today. Based on the framework of this ancient story, what is the massive allied army weighing down your life right now? Are you exhausting yourself trying to fight it entirely on your own? Or will you take your position, trade your anxiety for praise, and stand firm to see the deliverance?